Serial killers may feel like a long-gone specter of the 70s and 80s, but the ongoing prosecution of Long Island's Rex Heuermann proves that the danger is still very real. And most terrifying of all, he nearly got away with it.
You have someone who's been potentially living in Long Island, refining his techniques, and going after women, basically with impunity, right under everyone's nose.
Welcome to Ms. Mojo, and today we're investigating the shocking true story of the Long Island serial killer.
Not one, not two, but 3 more sets of remains.
A modern Jack the Ripper, Rex targeted young women engaged in sex work primarily between the 90s and 2010s, and has since been charged in the deaths of 7 victims. But what makes this case so viscerally unsettling is just how long he managed to remain undetected.
You've got 10 unsolved murders, and there were no leads, no suspects, no persons of interest.
Netflix's documentary series Gone Girls, the Long Island Serial Killer positively identifies the key factors that delayed his comeuppance, each compounding like a sickening gut punch. Despite the determination of the victims' loved ones to find the perpetrator, it seemed as though they were the only ones looking.
You're a very weak man. You prey on small, innocent girls. We're gonna get you.
Here are the downright disturbing reasons why the Long Island serial killer was provided a fertile hunting ground for decades, and exactly who might have enabled his abominable streak. A discovery. The search for one missing woman, Shannan Gilbert, led to the discovery of a dumping ground that had effectively turned Long Island's Ocean Parkway into a mass grave.
This is the one place I didn't think anything bad could happen. And it's the one place it did.
In 2010, skeletal remains were identified off the shoulder of the scenic roadway, but they didn't belong to Shannan, and neither did the next 3 sets of body parts police uncovered. The proximity of the bones to one another, along with the fact that they'd been bound in burlap, immediately triggered alarm bells that this was likely the work of one lunatic. As media descended on the story, the serial killer theory stuck. Word rapidly spread around the island that a madman was at large, generating a sense of hysteria that sleepy Suffolk County was no longer safe. That is, only if you're a sex worker.
The victims of these homicides are engaged in a high-risk business, and these homicides appear to us to be directly related to that business.
As the Gilgo 4 were ID'd, the commonalities became blatant. Amber Lynn Costello, Melissa Bartholomew, Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Megan Waterman. These young women all had one thing in common. They had engaged in prostitution, a key term that became deeply stigmatized throughout the investigation.
The police laughed at her and said, oh, you know, don't worry, she's a prostitute. She'll turn up.
Public sentiment began to shift from lock your doors to as long as you don't participate in that line of work, he won't come after you.
Police were saying, like, if you're not a sex worker, you don't have anything to worry about.
This attitude permeated the county, echoing throughout the greater New York area and reinforcing a primitive sense of disdain for sex workers. While it was undoubtedly tragic that these young women had lost their lives, there was a worrisome sense of collective relief that these victims supposedly brought it on themselves.
I think that it was very comforting when we found out that he was targeting a specific group of women from a specific website, so that it made it something that was removed from us.
6 more sets of scattered remains, including those of a toddler, were found the following year, until remnants of Shannan were finally unearthed. Although her death remains a mystery and has not been linked to the Long Island serial killer case, it would take 13 years for an arrest and the other slayings to occur. So why did it take over a decade to crack the case?
That's 30 years where he might have been harming other people, killing God knows how many people.
A crooked investigation. The elements along the brush, such as the salt water and harsh sun, had stripped the crime scenes of key information.
There wasn't a real lot of things of forensic value left at the scene.
Most of the remains were eventually identified, but 3 does remain unaccounted for to this day. Although the story made global news in the early 2010s, it quickly went cold. Under pressure to issue a response, police offered the public nothing.
I can't comment on how they're working the case because they're not working the case.
Despite having a precise location where Shannan was last seen alive, search teams failed to check the marsh because it was deemed wasteful and inhospitable to their efforts.
I showed them what direction she went in, and that was the last I saw of her. And quite frankly, the last we saw of the police department, too.
This is even more egregious when considering that Suffolk PD is one of the highest paid forces in the country.
To dedicate that amount of resources when it was just a mystery as to what happened to her, it was just not something that we did.
When they finally did look there, they found her. And so emerged a trend of the local jurisdiction failing to adequately deliver on their oath to serve and protect. Because sex workers are less likely to come forward and speak with police, investigators should have made greater attempts to reach out to that community. Yet they ignored these valuable people who could have helped thread the story together. In fact, they even began to neglect important collaboration with the victims' mothers as well.
Have you gotten any updates from police, from investigators?
Honestly, Suffolk County Police Department have not talked to me. I am at the point right now of setting up a PayPal account to try to get donations to hire a private investigator myself.
Time continued to tick on with no true lead standing out. The immediate rush of interest dissipated, and a periodic column reminding local newspaper readers that there were no updates became the rule.
For most people, it's just a story, and for us, it's our life.
Internal politics further tainted the investigation. The retiring commissioner and DA, Tom Spota, disagreed on even the most basic principles of this case, such as whether or not one person was responsible for the murders.
You have a serial killer dumping bodies along this stretch.
Well, I'm not going to say that, but certainly we're looking at that.
And the decision to appoint Inspector James Burke as chief of department was a controversial one.
He had more than a dozen internal affairs complaints against him. To put that underqualified, scandal-plagued officer at the top of one of the largest jurisdictions in the United States was a completely shocking move.
In fact, he'd been recommended for the role by Spota, who had his own blemished track record of forcing dubious confessions in order to get convictions. Incredibly, Spota had worked with Burke in a 1979 murder case to develop a shaky eyewitness testimony that served as the key to scoring another series of convictions.
This case sets the relationship up between Jimmy Burke and Tom Spota for the next 30 years.
With Burke heading the Gilgo Beach investigation, Suffolk County PD isolated itself from the neighboring county, state police, and even the FBI, turning away analysis that was underway because it was deemed irrelevant.
Detectives were also obstructed from providing information to the FBI's behavioral science unit to assist with the analysis, the profiling of the killer. And that was the doing of Tom Spota and James Burke.
Directives were even sent out stating that if a member of service was contacted by an external agency, they were to immediately notify their supervisor. It began to feel as if the urgency to contain all information regarding the case was a power grab at best and a cover-up at worst. And so the conspiracy theories began to pile up.
The police this and the district attorney that. The first 20 times I would sort of wave it aside saying, this is a murder case. I don't want to talk about conspiracy theories. But then after a while, it became clear that these weren't theories.
One of the most shocking speculations to surface was that Burke himself could be responsible for the murders. It was revealed that he'd hired several escorts while the investigation was ongoing, with one woman even describing that interaction at a press conference.
He seemed to like to choke me.
In response, Burke quickly lawyered up, with none other than Tom Spota at his side. Another popular theory centered Burke's attempts to slow the investigation as a means of stifling the ultimate discovery that a close friend of his was the killer. Regardless of whether one subscribed to these theorems, it became clear why the efforts to resolve the case stagnated.
All the cops amongst ourselves would say, it's a joke, he doesn't care about that. He would call them misdemeanor murders, where they really weren't important. They're not a high priority. They're just prostitutes.
In 2015, Burke was arrested for violently assaulting and threatening the life of a petty offender. While looking into those who defended Burke during that investigation, Spota was also taken down for obstruction of justice.
Rather than focusing on that case, Burke and other top investigative minds in law enforcement were totally consumed with just trying to keep him out of prison.
The Suffolk County Commissioner changed hands multiple times over the next several years, each chipping away at formerly ignored data in the investigation. Finally, in 2023, a breakthrough put the rumors to rest and pinpointed the prime suspect. A killer unmasked. Police narrowed the search for the killer by tracing cell phone pings on burner phones that had been in touch with victims. They identified a pattern of travel for these devices from Midtown Manhattan to a residence in southern Long Island. Through eyewitness testimony of the suspect's physical description and vehicle, police had a new name: Rex Heuermann.
Rex Heuermann, I'm an architect, I'm an architectural consultant, I'm a troubleshooter. Born and raised on Long Island. Okay. Been working in Manhattan since 1987.
They began to surveil him and uncovered an alarming trend in his behavior that perfectly lined up with the killer's. After discarding a pizza box, his DNA was swabbed from the half-eaten crust and matched to evidence found at the crime scenes: a smoking gun.
He was outside his architecture firm last night around 8:30. Then as he left his offices, detectives were seen following him near 5th Avenue and 35th Street.
During his younger years, he spent a lot of time working at the Parks Department and as a ranger at the Suffolk beaches, so his knowledge of the area's blueprints provided all the intel he needed to kickstart his nefarious career as a serial killer. The married father of two had spent his entire life living in that same dilapidated home in the quaint suburb of Massapequa Park, while neighbors felt he was odd and kept to himself.
He creeped a lot of people out, just by his size and the house.
The discovery that a monster had been living among them sent shockwaves throughout the community. Rex's co-workers at his New York City architecture firm were just as rattled.
Think back at all the times you were with him, alone, working with him for so many years. You know, it just brought me chills.
Rex's family was also clueless about his double identity, as he found time to be both a family man and a prolific murderer. In a bizarre twist, his wife Asa quickly filed for divorce, but continues to maintain his innocence.
Nobody wants to believe their family member, their dad, their husband would be capable of these kind of crimes.
Though a trial date has yet to be set, the case of who was responsible appears to be effectively closed. However, the case of why it took so long to stop Rex remains unresolved. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Gone Girls. So why the title? Why Gone Girls? Well, the young women who disappeared at the hands of Rex were effectively gone. Gone from this world, gone from social consciousness.
Nobody wanted to look for her sister. They couldn't even get Maureen's name onto the list of missing persons, the national database.
A 2020 thriller similarly titled Lost Girls is inspired by the efforts of Shannan's mother Mary to link the grieving families together and raise awareness for their missing girls.
The police failed us. They failed every one of our girls.
Time and time again, the narrative that these women were just escorts dominated the conversation, and their humanity was stripped away.
You guys all put out there prostitutes and hookers. They were just like anybody else standing here with me. They're still human beings. Do not use prostitute or hookers because they were not that.
That's what the police are saying.
This grim public mindset also bled into the ethos of the police department. Between deep-seated corruption and misprioritized agendas, the case continued to slip out of the jurisdiction's hands.
It was always one excuse after another. We don't have people, we're on a budget, we can't afford overtime. And finally, they agreed to look for her. Almost 8 months later.
The troubling realities of which unsolved murders are properly investigated, as well as exactly who is considered worth looking for, are both deeply telling.
There's a lot of coverage when a teacher goes missing. When your next door neighbor, who's a mother of 3, goes missing. But there's very little coverage when a woman who is a sex worker falls off the grid.
By failing to resolve the case as swiftly as possible, officials also failed the victims, their families, the greater community, and in a sense, the entire world that watched on.
Maureen was not just a sex worker, not just one of the Gilgo 4. She was somebody's friend. She's, somebody's sister, somebody's mom.
This dangerous precedent that one victim is worth less than another not only enables serial killers to pick off the low-hanging fruit, but deeply violates the ethics of a department designed to safeguard citizens. So with justice hopefully around the corner, there's still another layer to this case that needs to be settled. Accountability for the botched investigation, assurance that this can never happen again, and a shift in sentiment that these women and others like them deserve better, that they should never remain gone.